Hello everybody. We are coming in today for our video here for the date of September 2nd, although here in the United States it is actually kind of a day late given the factor that this event that we're going to discuss happened at Japan's time with the Pacific little time frame, so a day over here, Japan's a day ahead of us. So while it is September 2nd over here, it is only September 3rd over there, so the date's already kind of passed. So a little time difference, but I'm just going to discard that. So for today, although it was technically yesterday, September 1st, on our time at least, it marked 75 years since the official surrender of Japan at the end of World War II, which not only marked Japan's final surrender in the war, but it marked also the end of World War II as a whole. As we did a video back in May, the German surrender had taken place earlier in 1945, taken place on May 8th. Nazi Germany had surrendered after the suicide of Adolf Hitler and many prominent leading Nazi families and generals, and Germany had officially surrendered in early May. However, Japan did not. Japan had continued to wage war. It was defiant till the end. It was saying that it would not surrender in any circumstance, that death was more preferable, it was more honorable. They would not surrender on it under any circumstance. And as we also discussed in one of our previous videos, it would take the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th of 1945, respectively, to finally force Japan to come to terms and realize if you don't surrender now, it's going to be utter destruction. There's no changing the fact that you're going to lose this war. You've lost. It's just a matter you need to surrender and do it now before you have to lose I don't know how many of your people. So as that's kind of the thing what has brought us up to this point. Japan had entered World War II on the side of the Axis. It had coincidentally was the last Axis power to surrender. So while the war in Europe was over, the war in Asia and the Pacific was not. So, as we have come to this momentous day, 75 years later, I felt it might be appropriate to discuss the surrender ceremony that took place on that day. September 2nd was declared back then, and to my knowledge, some calendars still mark it as VJ Day, which stands for Victory in Japan Day, and it was basically declared that by President Harry Truman, who was president at the time after the death of FDR in April of 1945. Harry Truman had been his vice president, and he automatically took office upon FDR's death. So I thought it might be appropriate to just slightly mention and give us a little background as to what happened on this day. So that's what we're going to go ahead and do here. So as I mentioned in our previous video, the atomic bombs brought everything to a close for Japan. It finally forced Japan to surrender. However, prior to the atomic bombs ever being dropped, I'm going to give you the reminder, the Allies did indeed have a plan to invade Japan prior to the atomic bombs being dropped. This was codenamed Operation Olympic, is what it was termed to be as. However, there was one major problem with the proposed Operation Olympic. If the atomic bombs had not been dropped and Japan had not surrendered in August of 1945, the war would not have ended that year. I am telling you this now. The war would have drug on for possibly another year or even two, up to 1946, 1947. Operation Olympic was not planned to start until November of 1945, and had it gone through, many Allied leaders, and rightfully so, they feared that if we invade Japan, if we invade the main Japanese islands of Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, and Hokkaido, they very much feared that given the intense Japanese resistance that they had encountered on just the island hopping campaign through the Pacific, on islands such as Iwo Jima, the Marianas, such as Peleliu there, you had Okinawa, and all these little battles that we had fought in our island campaign across the Pacific, as we got closer and closer to Japan, the Japanese fought with increasing resistance. They refused to surrender. They would fight to the death or they would commit suicide. Which, in the case when they would fight to the death, it not only exasperated their casualties, but it exasperated our own. Ours were going up through the roof. So the fear was that if they fight like this just for a couple of islands in the Pacific, what are they going to do when we invade the home islands, their home? And I can tell you what they were going to do. They would employ every means. The Japanese government was already making plans. They were telling its civilians to prepare for invasion, to prepare to defend their home to the last person standing. Didn't matter if you were a man, woman, child. They didn't care. It did not matter to them. They basically said, fight to the death or it's dishonorable to you and your entire family and to your nation and your emperor. The Japanese people were very loyal to their emperor, because back then there was the belief that the emperor was the son of a descendant of the sun god. Now today, the emperor has been forced, mostly due to the new constitution that Japan adopted after World War II, to renounce his divinity. He is no longer portrayed as a godlike figure, although some Japanese still highly hold him up to that regard, but the emperor, the imperial family themselves, and the emperor have officially stated that they are not that. But anyway, the big fear was that if we went ahead with Operation Olympic in November of 1945 as planned, the casualties were estimated it could be 10 times worse than the casualties the Allies had suffered the previous year in 1944 when they invaded Normandy on D-Day to basically liberate France from Nazi Germany. And that was a bad day for casualties. It was a victorious day. We won, but it had a lot of casualties, and the fear was it's going to be worse than that. So what do? We got to get out of this somehow. And that's where the atomic bombs, we went through that whole decision. I talked about that in one of our, just a couple weeks ago. We went through the atomic bombs. We decided we're going to use them. Luckily, give or take what your view is, they did work. It did force Japan to officially kind of come to terms that you're done. I mean, how much further do you want to go here? It's just a question of when you're going to surrender, not a question of if. Of course, after the U.S. dropped the atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese war cabinet, they're very much conflicted. They cannot decide over whether to surrender or not. Half are in favor, half are not. Instead, the Prime Minister Suzuki, he goes to the Emperor himself, Emperor Hirohito, and he asks him to break the deadlock. Hirohito decides that he desires peace. He makes this very clear to the cabinet, and he issues his formal vote that he favors peace and it favors that they should accept the Allies' terms for surrender. That, and as Hirohito put it in his own words, he put that peace was preferable to destruction. Now, of course, the Japanese military was very fanatical. They were very much old samurai code that death was more honorable than surrender. And of course, they even went against the emperor slightly, because the very next day on August 15th, and this is in Japan, and here it was August 14th. On the morning of August 15th, the military did try to stage a coup. This ultimately did fail, and in response, a lot of Japanese military leaders actually committed suicide. They committed seppuku, the little sword for your stomach after you write a suicide note. And most of these notes were like an apology to the emperor, saying, "I'm sorry, I failed you as a soldier." So the coup fails, and Hirohito officially makes his broadcast over the Japanese radio, announcing to the people his intent to have Japan surrender. And this was very momentous for the Japanese people, because they had never before heard their emperor speak, ever. And to hear his voice was like, I'll give you a good comparison of how momentous this was to them. For the Japanese people at that point to have heard their emperor's voice, it was very much like a Christian hearing the voice of God. You don't get it every day. And most Christians, I can't say that they've heard the voice of God. Because some of them, I mean, you may get inklings if you're Christian. I'm Christian, that's why I'm bringing this up. You may get inklings, God may put thoughts in your mind, or he may tell you something mentally, but for you to actually physically hear him, that doesn't happen to too many people. This was very similar in comprehension. What that would be like to a Christian is what the emperor speaking to his people was to them. It was that momentous. Hirohito, in his radio broadcast, officially said, and this is his own words, and I'm quoting him now, "We have resolved to pave the way for a grand peace for all the generations to come by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable." For the Japanese people, they were shocked. They were shocked that the country was going to surrender because they had always been told it was dishonorable that you fight to the death, and now they're getting word from the emperor that they're going to surrender. And normally they would brush it off as coward, but this is the emperor. And some of them wept, some of them just, they didn't talk. They were just shocked beyond a doubt that it had come to this. They had thought that they were going to win the war earlier on, and now it's complete reversal. Upon hearing the news of the Japanese offer to surrender on August 15th, of course, in the United States, it was August 14th, the United States immediately accepted Japan's surrender. So we covered that in the last video. That's just kind of this has all just kind of been a warm-up, kind of not a warm-up, but well, what would you use the term for? Refresher of what had happened. Now we're going to get to what September 2nd actually is for this day. What happened 75 years ago that brought an end to this most horrific of human conflicts. So as preparations are being made following the acceptance of Japan's surrender, the preparations begin being made for the official surrender ceremony. Now, President Truman of the United States here, he appoints General Douglas MacArthur to head the American occupation of Japan. It is understood by the Japanese and by the Allies that as the Allies split up occupation of Germany after World War II had ended in Europe, there was also going to be an occupation of Japan. But since the United States had been the main foe of Japan in the Pacific, they had been the main ones carrying out the Pacific War more than any other Allied nation, it was agreed upon that it would be the United States who got sole occupational right of Japan. Now, there would be some other contentious areas, such as the island of Formosa or Taiwan would be given to China. The Korean Peninsula, which Korea was a Japanese colony at the time, would be split between the American-occupied South and the Soviet-occupied North, which kind of sets the prefix for for a conflict not too far in the future. It has had a very profound impact on the Korean Peninsula and continues to this day. I'm pretty sure you can get a hint what that is. So that happens, but it is understood that the Americans will occupy Japan and rebuild it as they see fit. Now, Harry Truman, he apparently puts Douglas MacArthur in charge as the Supreme Allied Commander in the Pacific, and he is in charge of that occupation, but he is also instructs MacArthur that he will preside over the surrender personally. Truman chooses the site of the surrender. The United States gets to choose the site, and he decides on the battleship USS Missouri. Now, why did he choose the Missouri? There are two reasons that Truman had chosen the Missouri. One was the factor that the Missouri had seen quite a bit of action during the Pacific War. It itself had fought in many of the naval battles, provided naval support, and at times had even been hit by kamikaze planes. The other reason was somewhat personal for Truman, as the battleship's name. The USS Missouri, the battleship was named after the U.S. state of Missouri, which I mentioned this is personal. Missouri was Truman's home state. So to him, it was a little personal. So he chose it. A, it's seen a lot of action, and B, it was named after his home state. MacArthur is, of course, as we mentioned, he is going to preside over the surrender. However, MacArthur decides to delay the surrender until September 1st. Keep in mind, Japan officially announced the surrender on August 14th/15th, depending on which country you're in. But this official surrender will not happen until September 2nd/1st. So we cut to September 2nd. And why would he delay this? MacArthur delayed it mostly due to the factor that it was understood that there would be representatives from all the other major Allied nations, and he wanted to give those representatives time to come and get there. On Sunday, September 2nd of 1945, the USS Missouri and 250 Allied warships dropped their anchor early in the morning in Tokyo Bay. Excuse me. The Missouri then flew all the flags up on its masts and its little lines and everything else. It flew on its rigging, I guess is what you'd call it. It flew the flags of all the major Allied nations, including the United States, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, and China. Remember, at this time, China is not communist. So what happens is we start at about 9 a.m. At 9 a.m., the Japanese delegation arrives for the official instrument to sign the official instrument of surrender, the surrender documents, as you might want to put them. After 9 a.m., the Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu, I'm going to say this again, Mamoru Shigemitsu, he officially signs the surrender documents on Japan's behalf, on behalf of Japan. He is wearing a top hat, I believe, in one of the photos. For some reason, the members of the delegation that were not members of the Army or the Navy or any of the military branches, wore like a top hat and suit, and the military leaders, of course, had their imperial military gear on, except for a gun, of course. Immediately following Shigemitsu signing it, oh my, I'm gonna have to see this one. Yoshihiro Yumisu. Yoshihiro Yumisu is the Japanese general that officially signs the instrument of surrender on behalf of Japan's armed forces, for the Navy, for the Air Force, for the Army. And as he does this, unlike when Shigemitsu had signed it, when Yoshihiro Yumisu signs it, since he is basically signing for the Japanese army, which had been very reluctant to surrender, and they were the ones that held the samurai traditions to heart. When he signs it, you can actually hear in many of the news accounts, and I think maybe one video that they have, there's some archival footage they have of it. If you look behind him, the aides that he had with him actually are weeping. They're crying because they're surrendering, because this was so unthinkable to them. It was so dishonorable to be surrendering. General MacArthur, after Yumisu had signed the document and the Japanese delegation was done signing the instruments of surrender, General MacArthur, he then goes and signs next. He signs as the Supreme Allied Commander, and after he does so, he makes a brief little small statement. And this is what his statement was, and I'm quoting him, so this is not my words, this is his. So I'm quoting General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Allied Commander. "It is my earnest hope, and indeed the hope of all mankind, that from this solemn occasion a better world shall emerge out of the blood and carnage of the past, a world founded upon faith and understanding." After MacArthur was finished making his statement and signing the instruments of surrender, 10 more signatures were then added to the instruments of surrender, one for a representative from each of the major Allied nations, which included the United States, China, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, Australia, France, Canada, the Netherlands, and New Zealand. And as for, if you're an American like me and you want to know who signed ours for the United States, you had Admiral Chester Nimitz signed for the United States Army. Well, just the United States, not the Army. For the United States as a whole. He was the main commander of the Pacific Naval Fleet. You can look up a photo of him if you want. I did not think to print one of him off, so I do apologize for that. Now, however, there was a small mistake made when they signed these instruments of surrender, and it wasn't really major, but to the Japanese, they made it major because they were already kind of ticked off they were surrendering, and of course, they're going to want this to be perfect, and you're not going to cut us short, and blah, blah, blah. Only the defeated would care about this. Only the Japanese at this point would have cared about this. Not today. Of course, today I don't think anybody would care. But back then, given the attitude they had, they were the only one that cared about this. And the mistake ended up being when the Canadian representative came, which was a man by the name, he was Colonel Lawrence Cosgrave. He signed for Canada. He signed his signature. There were printed lines on the instruments of surrender documents. And each one had a country's name, and it had a line. And your name, your signature, would go above the line, like you would on an official document. Well, Colonel Cosgrave made the common mistake. He signed below the line. He got confused. Now, some people say, well, why did he do that? I mean, I don't understand that. Well, many actually think it may have been because Colonel Cosgrave did have an eye injury. He had only one good eye because his other eye had actually been injured during World War I. So it could have been the factor he couldn't quite see straight when he was signing it, and he signed it a little wrong. He signed his name, just not quite in the right spot. Well, then the problem came after he had signed it in the wrong spot. He then The representatives that came after he did, that were signed after him, had to sign their name in the wrong spot because they had to move one down. So everyone's name below Canada is in the wrong spot. Well, this is pointed out by one of the Allied generals that is overseeing the signing. And of course, upon discovering this, the Japanese delegation, they automatically protest and they're saying this is invalid. We need to redo this and everything else. And the Americans and the other allies, of course, they're like, no, we're not going to redo this over a simple ink mistake. So instead, and what the bad thing was, this was only on the Japanese copy. There were two copies that were being signed. You had the official Allied copy, and then you had a copy for the Japanese. The mistake happened on the Japanese copy, which is probably why the Japanese were so angry in the first place. So what happens is, because of Japan's representatives complaining, the delegation members complaining about this, the pre-printed names were crossed out on the lines. The names of the countries next to the lines were crossed out, and a general then took the pen and wrote down the correct country names next to the correct signatures, and then initialed it to make it official. This only lasted about 20 minutes. It was a very short ceremony. We're actually pretty much done here. And after about 20 minutes, the ceremony was officially complete. The documents were signed, and the delegation left. And as they left, as just kind of a final kick in the face to Japan, as well as a massive celebration, a massive show of Allied air power then flew overhead of the Missouri and the other Allied warships in Tokyo Bay, and they were just hundreds of them. I kid you not, hundreds of them. I actually have a photo of it, and oh my gosh, talk about, you want to do that. I mean, yeah, I understand why, but at the same time, you're doing it right in Japan, and the people in Tokyo can see that, and they're like, well, you don't have to be so goaty about it. You don't gotta be like that. But they had reason to celebrate. It was the end of the most destructive conflict in history. With the signing of of those two documents, not only had Japan finally surrendered, but it marked the end of World War II. It marked the end of 6 bloody, carnage-filled years of just utter chaos, carnage, bloodletting, senseless violence, killing, and unfortunate genocide. World War II, many of us living today, we live in the shadow of that era. We really do. A lot of our world today has been shaped by the events that happened just around in World War II, or just following its closure. And of course, we really need to respect what happened and understand what happened back then. And but I'm going to say this again. World War II was the most destructive human conflict in history. It really was. You had over, I'm going to make sure I say this number right. You had over 60 million people killed worldwide. This included both military and civilian deaths. And this was just the killed portion. This wasn't counting the missing, the wounded, the people that were killed in genocides. I mean, this might actually include the genocides. But like the Holocaust alone, you had 6 million killed systematically. World War II, they teach it so lightheartedly nowadays in schools. They really do. They don't teach kids, they don't teach people the true carnage of it. They don't teach these kids and these people, they don't teach them how momentous this was. If the Allies had lost, the world would be probably in one of the worst places it's ever been. It would be under nothing but a dictatorship. It was a triumph for evil to finally be squashed by good. So I'm going to go ahead here and show some images. Yes, step. This is more just kind of a looking back day, I suppose, and thinking how far the world has come since that time. We think the world's bad now, and I sure, of course, it is bad right now. We got a pandemic going on, but the world has not ever gotten to the point, I don't think, since 1945, since the 1940s, that World War II brought. We have not. This is an image of the Japanese Foreign Minister Mamoru Shigemitsu signing the instrument of surrender on board the Missouri, with the Allied military members and Allied general kind of looking on as he signs it. Shigemitsu is the one hovering over the table with the pen. General Yumisu would soon follow him. Here we have an image of General Douglas MacArthur, the Supreme Allied Commander in the Pacific. He is officially signing for as his signature on the document. He was. And then we have a photo here of the airplanes flying overhead in Tokyo Bay, overhead the Missouri. You can see the Missouri in this picture right here. This big ship right there, that's the Missouri. And then overhead, all these little black dots are planes, even the ones back in here. They're all planes. This is just a fraction of them. This is not all of them. There's more, but this is only the ones that got captured in the shot. Then, as a final little show here, I have, at least in my possession, I did have over the summer, I actually made a little Missouri model. This is what the Missouri looks like. We're going to try to get this in the frame. This is about what she looks like, at least at that time. This was the ship that they chose as the surrender site for the official end of World War II. Today, the Missouri is decommissioned. It was the last battleship to be commissioned by the United States. It was decommissioned in 1992. It's actually fired a few shots in the Persian Gulf War in 1990, 1991. And it is today a museum ship in Pearl Harbor. It actually overlooks the Arizona, kind of as a symbolic kind of show, where this one is floating and has its guns trained forward. The Arizona is in front of it, the sunken Arizona. It kind of marks the beginning of World War II for the United States with the attack on Pearl Harbor, with the Arizona's wreck, and then the end of it with the Missouri behind where the war ended. And also it's symbolic, as most people play it, as the Missouri is kind of standing guard and watching over the Arizona, protecting her. Then if you go to the Missouri, they actually have a plaque on her. They do have a plaque on the ship itself that you can go see if you go to see it. Of course, I don't think you want to go right now during a pandemic. But the plaque, and that's what this actually kind of is, but I couldn't really paint it to get the detail out without obscuring the detail, so I'm going to read what the plaque says here. The plaque says, USS Missouri, over this spot on September 2nd, 1945, the instrument of formal surrender of Japan to the Allied powers was signed, thus bringing to a close the Second World War. The ship at that time was at anchor in Tokyo Bay. And then at the bottom, it has the latitude and the longitude positions of the ship at that time when it was signed. Of course, this is actually in the deck, so when it says over this spot, it is actually the site where the surrender was on the deck. But that is the Missouri, where the war finally kind of came to a close. So today is kind of a day of remembrance, just kind of like May 8th was. We need to remember World War II in full, and that includes any veterans out there that are still alive, as a lot of our World War II generation is unfortunately gone. A lot of them are passing away. They're actually our most rapidly fading generation, and they were the greatest generation, no matter what theater they served in. I myself had at least one in my family that I know served in it. He served in Europe, though. He did not serve in Japan, but I am proud that I did have a family member that served. And I'm sure anybody, any family, no matter if you're American, no matter if you're Canadian, British, Russian, Chinese, anybody, you're probably proud you had a relative that fought in that war. They fought for liberty, they fought for freedom, they fought for justice, they fought for humankind. They fought against evil and dark, dark, dark powers. I'm going to say that very muchly, because Nazi Germany was just, it was hell on earth. It was hell. But today marks kind of a day of remembrance, but also a day of appreciation for where we've come. And I highly implore you to, if you have a veteran in your family that's still alive, or you know of one, you know where their grave is, I ask you that this week, at least, if you can't do it today, go this week and just go visit their grave or go visit them and just tell them thank you. I don't care if you're talking to a tombstone, tell them that. But I ask you to do that. It's very important that we let these veterans know that what you fought for was right, and we thank you for that, or else we wouldn't be here today. We really, really wouldn't. I myself implore that to my family members that have passed on, that have served in any branch of the military, and I very much implore that to any veteran that I have ever met. So I also implore it on here. So as I get ready to close out here, I thank any veteran of World War II. If you or anyone watches this, I thank you for your service. I thank you for your duty to mankind that you fulfilled in full honor. And without your service, without your sacrifice, we would not be standing here today on free soil. Neither would any of the world. So I thank you for all that you sacrificed and all that you have done in your service to this, not only to your whatever country you served, but to the world as a whole and to humanity. So I thank you for that if you are a veteran and you happen to watch this. So that will conclude here because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time. I want this day to mostly be for respect and remembrance for those of World War II. And in fact, we can actually, yeah, we'll go ahead here. Just out of respect for the 60 million lives who got lost that day, I do want to take a short, brief moment of silence, which I think and feel is appropriate. So we're going to go ahead and do that right now. Okay. So if you by chance do anything this week, I heavily implore you say thanks to a veteran, no matter if they're gone on to be with the Lord or if they are still alive. I implore you to say thank you to them. I myself, again, if you have one in your family, let them know that I've said thank you. So that concludes our video on the official end of World War II with the Japanese surrender ceremony on September 2nd of 1945, which brought an end to the most destructive conflict that the world has ever known, World War II. So that will end this little video. As for future videos here, I have not forgotten the channel. I know I've been a little slow on uploads lately, but I have not forgotten. I do have some video ideas in mind. I'm just simply debating over which one to do first or which ones might be better. So I am got some video ideas coming up. I might have one up this weekend, but it might be busy due to Labor Day weekend. So we'll see. But I do have video ideas. It's just I'm kind of debating over which ones I want to do and which ones I don't. So it's not that I'm slowing down. It's just that I'm trying to be more thoughtful on what I'm choosing over subjects that I haven't included quite yet. So if you have any ideas, feel free to let me know, because right now, if you have an idea, that would actually kind of help me out, because I'm trying to decide things and I can't really decide real quick. So if someone pops an idea in my head, I'll go ahead and do whatever the suggestion is, and I'll still have time to think about that. So that would actually be helpful. If any of you have an idea, go ahead and put that in the comments section below on any of the videos, not just this one. So as always, feel free to like the video, feel free to subscribe it, feel free to do any of that. Check out the other ones. So again, remember what to do this week. As I've told you, say thanks to any veteran you meet from World War II, or if you have a family member that served and they're no longer there, or they are still here, say thanks to them. So as always, I wish the best for everyone here. May we all remember what happened on this day, and basically, we shall never forget the sacrifice of all those that unfortunately had to perish 75 years ago. So, with that said, we are going to close out here. May you all have a good rest of your week and a good Labor Day weekend if I do not come back during that time frame. And let's just hope for the best as time marches forth, that we never see a conflict like that again, ever. And we'll go ahead and close out. So, have a good rest of your week, weekend, and may God bless you all, and may God bless the world.